Welcome to Faith in the Journey, the podcast that explores how ordinary kindness and steady faith carry us through life's hardest seasons. Each week, we share stories of people who meet everyday struggles with quiet courage. Today's episode is called Table for Two. It tells the story of Anna and Leah, two neighbors and friends whose simple nightly habit of reading scripture together became the steady presence that saw them through illness, recovery, and renewed community. They called it Table for Two. Anna and Leah shared a tiny kitchen table that somehow collected the noise of two busy lives. After long days at different jobs, they came home, flicked on the light, and settled across from each other with screens in hand. Dinner was often a quick thing eaten between messages and a show. Conversation shrank to logistics: who would take out the rubbish, which bills were due. They weren't strangers, but their routines had hardened into separate orbits, and the table held the quiet of that distance. One bleak winter night, fed up with how heavy the silence felt, Anna did something small and odd. She shoved her phone into a drawer, opened an old Bible she hadn't used in years, and half-joking said, "Try dinner with scripture." Leah shrugged and sat. They read a short verse and asked one simple question: what does this mean for today? At first, it was awkward. Their voices felt rusty. They stumbled over words. But it took only a few nights for the habit to stick. Some evenings, they laughed at a stray line. Some nights they argued about what a passage meant, and some nights they read and didn't say a thing, simply watching the other's face. There was no pressure, no sermon, just a verse, a question, and the slow practice of paying attention. They didn't begin with lofty passages. Often it was small, plain lines that fit the work of their lives. Once they read Psalm 46:1, "God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble." The verse didn't insist that trouble would vanish. Instead, it gave them permission to speak honestly about their fears under the kitchen light. Another evening brought Romans 12:12. "Be joyful in hope, patient in affliction, faithful in prayer." Those words didn't make the bills disappear, but they offered language: patient in affliction, faithful in prayer. The verses became a map for how to face slow, tedious pain. Months later, life knocked harder than either of them expected. Leah went to the doctor for a persistent ache. Tests revealed a diagnosis that felt heavy and uncertain. The word moved through hospital corridors like a hush. In those first days, the pattern they'd built at the little table mattered more than they had suspected. They had learned the routine of turning to scripture and asking, "What does this mean for today?" So in a waiting room crowded with plastic chairs, Anna read Matthew 11:28 aloud. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." She didn't promise an easy road. She said, "We'll sit with this. We'll rest when we can. I'm here." Hospital days had their own rhythms: early mornings, antiseptic smells, monitors that hum like distant seas. The nightly practice taught both of them how to be present. Anna learned when to speak and when to hold Leah's hand without trying to fix everything. She learned how to pray quietly, how to make a grocery run and leave a casserole on the doorstep, how to show up at 6 a.m. when chemo made mornings brutal. Those acts were plain and steady. They were also powerful. God's power in this story wasn't a dramatic rescue. It arrived in companionship and habit. The discipline of small, repeated kindnesses created a space where grace could move: a friend who sits, a neighbor who brings a blanket, a colleague who covers a shift. Hebrews' reminder about hospitality felt true in a new way. These ordinary offerings opened room for mercy and presence. They kept using scripture not as a mask, but as a lens. Some nights they read verses that felt like hope. Other nights they read psalms that sounded like complaints. Once, in the small blue glow of the bedside lamp, Leah read Psalm 13 aloud. "How long, Lord? Will you forget me forever?" They let the question hang. They did not pretend to have answers. They prayed that God would meet them in the question instead of rushing to tidy it away. That honesty mattered. It allowed fear and hope to exist together while they kept moving forward. Recovery, when it came, was uneven. There were good weeks and hard ones. Leah lost her hair and her appetite. There were mornings when getting out of bed felt like climbing. But the ritual at the chip table kept anchoring them. When Leah could barely form words, Anna read a single verse and sat in the silence that followed. When Leah's energy returned, even for an afternoon, they did ordinary things: laundry, grocery runs, late-night pizza at the table. Those ordinary days were small victories, the kind that add up. Neighbors began to notice the change in their flat. Where the table once collected only the city's background noise, people started leaving casseroles, a friend dropped off flowers, someone came by with news of a new job. The quiet had shifted. It no longer signaled distance, but had become a kind of openness where others could come close. Their home was a small community node for steady care. What made the difference wasn't eloquence or miraculous eradication of hardship. It was presence practiced nightly, the way scripture gave them words to name both fear and gratitude. Philippians' call to rejoice in the Lord took on a practical face, rejoicing in small things, grateful for the nurse who was gentle, the colleague who covered shifts, the neighbor who showed up with soup. Those small mercies piled up and became courage. Over time, Anna and Leah learned a simple truth. Faith didn't erase the hard parts, but it shaped how they met them. Scripture didn't answer every question, but it provided language and direction. Reminders to be patient in affliction, to be faithful in prayer, to carry one another's burdens. God's presence was visible not as a spectacle, but as steady companionship that turned a routine into rescue. The table that had collected silence now held stories. It held laughter and arguments, the quiet of shared grief and the messy joy of recovery. It held verses scribbled on napkins and the routine question they kept asking: what does this mean for today? That question kept them grounded, honest, and present. If you've been listening and your heart feels heavy tonight, remember, you don't need a grand plan to bring mercy into someone's life. Start small. Put your phone away at dinner one night. Read a short verse. Ask a simple question. Sit when you don't know what to say. Bring a casserole. Hold a hand. These steady, ordinary acts are how God's presence often becomes most visible, not always in dramatic fixes, but in faithful companionship that makes space for healing and hope. Thanks for joining us on Faith in the Journey. If this story encouraged you, share it with someone who might need a reminder that steady presence matters. Until next time, keep showing up, keep asking, and keep looking for the small mercies.